Just got admitted and we're having a baby tonight.
Yes, we are.
Hey everybody, it is me, Dee. Welcome back to my channel. Today I just wanted to share with you guys probably one of the most exciting videos I've made to date, and that is my labor and delivery update and vlog. If you're interested in seeing how my labor and delivery went, go ahead and keep watching. So on Wednesday, July 27th, I woke up probably about 8:15 in the morning. I went to the bathroom like usual because of course as a pregnant woman that is the first thing that you do and pretty much the most frequent thing that you do while you're pregnant. So I went to the bathroom and wiped, and I noticed this weird gooey discharge, and that discharge definitely wasn't something that was common during my pregnancy. So I looked into it and I was assuming it was my mucus plug. So I instantly went and woke up Randy and I let him know, don't be worried, but I think I just lost my mucus plug. It's nothing to be too concerned about because I've heard that women lose their mucus plugs and still don't go into labor for a few weeks. But I just wanted to alert him so he knew, so he could feel in the loop on everything that was going on. Later that day, on the 27th of July, which was a Wednesday, I had my 37-week checkup, and so I definitely wanted to let my doctor know that news. So I went into my doctor. They didn't end up doing any kind of cervical check for me during my pregnancy. They said that they didn't want to do that because they didn't want to push me into early labor. So I let my doctor know that I lost my mucus plug, and he didn't seem too concerned about it at all. He looked at my delivery date and he said since I was 37 weeks and a few days that I was far enough along for it to not be a concern if I did end up going into labor, but he didn't seem to think that I'd be going into labor anytime soon. So I didn't have to schedule any more appointments because they were already set up for the next few weeks. After the doctor's appointment, Randy and I decided to go grab some lunch. So we ended up going to Panda Express, and during that time, I was noticing that I had some cramping going on, but it wasn't anything that concerned me. It kind of felt like the beginning or the end of period cramps. It was just like light cramping in my back and in my stomach. So we continued on with the day, and later that night, it was probably close to about 10:20 p.m. We had some leftovers from Panda Express and we were both getting hungry, so we decided to heat up the leftovers and share what we had left. Well, during that time, I started having severe stomach cramps, so I decided to let Randy finish off the food, and I just went ahead and hung out for the rest of the night. Since my stomach was hurting, I decided to just go lay down in bed and try and relax and see if it helped my cramps go away. Throughout the night, I continuously woke up, probably about every 45 minutes to an hour, feeling cramps in my stomach. Sorry if you guys hear grunting. That sounds like a goat. My baby Zephyr is over here right next to me and he's just stretching in his sleep, so I apologize for that. But on and off throughout the night, about every 45 minutes to hour and 15 minutes, I was noticing cramps in my stomach, but it just felt like period cramps. It didn't seem anything like what I assumed labor would be. So again, I just kind of brushed it off. And I ended up waking up probably about 8:15 the next morning, and I was still having those cramps. And now, since it was about 8:15 in the morning, the cramps were seeming more consistent. Maybe not more consistent, but definitely more frequent. I was having a lot more of them, but they were ranging anywhere from 12 minutes apart to 45 minutes apart to, I couldn't really keep a regular track of them. So I thought, this probably isn't labor. If it is, I'm pretty far from actually delivering my baby, so I just kind of brushed it off, decided to watch some TV with Randy's dad and eat some toast, I think is what I ate. I can't remember, it was a few weeks ago now. And I just kept having cramps. So I decided, take a shower. I've heard that sometimes if you're having those cramps, take a bath or a shower and it can help relieve them. So I went ahead and did that. Still no relief. And so I just kept doing my normal things. I went to my computer and I was watching some YouTube videos, kind of got bored with the YouTube videos, so I decided to pull out one of my sketchbooks and draw, and I just wasn't really feeling it. I didn't even get anything sketched out. I just wasn't feeling it. I don't know why. And by this time, I think it was probably 10:30, 10:45-ish, and usually Randy wakes up about 11, or if he doesn't, I go and wake him up. So 11 o'clock-ish hits, and I went into the bedroom and I let Randy know how I was feeling, that I was having these cramps, and that I just wasn't feeling well. I'm not sure if he got any footage at this point, but I definitely wasn't feeling well enough to vlog or anything. I didn't personally think I was going into labor, so I decided to lay on my side and see if the cramps subsided. But as I was laying there, I started tearing up, and Randy didn't think that was normal, especially for me, because I'm the kind of person who has a pretty high pain tolerance. But Randy decided to text his mom and let her know that he thought I was going into labor, and she started texting him, but didn't want to be texting because she was on her way to a business trip in Southern California, and she wanted to call and kind of get a real feel for everything that was going on. So she ended up calling Randy, and her and Randy talked for a few minutes. Randy kept telling her he thought I was going into labor. She kept telling him, asking him questions about how I was feeling. And then Randy decided to hand the phone over to me, and I could barely even talk at this point. I was in tears. I was just in immense pain. I was going through a contraction at the moment. But again, I kept telling them, no, I'm not going into labor. I told her I didn't want her to make her way all the way over to Central California to come and see if I was in labor. So she kept telling Randy, take her to the hospital, and I just kept refusing.
Mom will be here in just a few minutes. She's on the 99 right now. Then we'll probably go. How you feeling, baby? What's the nod of the head like? What does that mean? You're okay. Well, how are your contractions? When was your last one? So they're pretty consistent, right?
I'm just scared that they're gonna say like 5 to 10 minutes is too long, you know?
Well, if they do, that's fine. Then we'll just come back. Hey, Dad, will you go unlock the front door? Having another one?
So Randy's mom decided she was going to drive over to our house, and during that time, Randy and I decided to get some food because I told him if I'm going into labor, I want to eat something now because I don't know when I'll be able to eat again, and I am starving. So there was a Subway right down the street from our house. We decided to go pick up the Subway and come home, and I finished my half 6-inch sandwich. But during that time, my cramps kept getting closer and closer together. At this point, I'm gonna stop saying cramps now and start saying contractions because they actually were contractions. And so at this point, they were anywhere from about 8 to 12 minutes apart. And this was about 1:30 in the afternoon. So shortly after that, probably around 2 o'clock-ish, my contractions were about 5 to 8 minutes apart, and that's when Randy's mom showed up. And when she showed up, I was just trying to gather all of my last-minute items, like my camera, batteries, things like that. And I was in a dark room, and I was kind of in the corner where I was gathering my stuff. And the other day, his mom told me that I just looked like a scared little girl, just terrified to see what was going on, which I was. I was very, very nervous. I was very terrified. Going into labor was my biggest fear throughout the pregnancy. I'm not sure why, but I just had an immense fear of going into labor and just everything that was going to be experienced with it. So when his mom got there, we basically all decided, let's hop in the car, grab everything we need, and head off to the hospital. So at about 2:53 p.m., we ended up checking into the hospital, and the hospital I ended up going to was Clovis Community in Central California in the Central Valley. And I had wanted to go to a different hospital because that's where I planned on delivering. It was a lot closer to home, but my insurance only covered the one that was about 40 minutes from my house, which was Clovis Community. Luckily, it wasn't that bad of a drive, but my contractions were still about 5 minutes apart at this time. So we showed up to Clovis Community. Like I said, it was probably about 2:53 when I finally checked in, and we went ahead and processed my paperwork. They gave me my little armband, and they sent me into the triage room for labor and delivery. And the triage room, basically what that is they take you in there, they hook you up to machines to check and monitor your contractions, your baby's fetal movement and heartbeat, as well as they check you for cervical dilation. So I was in there, it was probably about an hour, hour and a half. I was kind of just, they had me do a urine sample. They were hooking me up to the machines, monitoring things, and about an hour and a half into it, so probably close to about 4 o'clock, 4:30, they decided to do a cervical check, which I was dilated to 4 centimeters, which was a huge relief to me because I didn't think I was in labor and I didn't think I was dilated. So I kept pushing off going to the hospital because I didn't want to be turned around and sent home. So they decided, since I was dilated to a 4, that they were gonna have me walk around for an hour if I felt up to it to see if the dilation progressed. So Randy and I decided to walk around for about an hour, and I know that he got some footage of that part, so I might go ahead and clip it in here.
Got lunch, ate some pizza and stuff.
You don't know, but I've been secretly recording you all day. Barbie princess.
Basically what we were doing was we were just walking around the hospital, talking, trying to keep my mind off of the fact that I was in labor. And that point, the contractions started getting pretty bad, especially because they checked me for dilation. I started bleeding, which I didn't really realize until I got back from my hour walk, and I looked at the bed and I thought, holy crap, there is blood all over this bed. That is not what was happening to me before we came into the hospital. And so they checked me again for my dilation progression when I got back to the triage room, and I don't know if I mentioned this already, but I did progress from a 4 to a 5. So when they saw that I progressed, they decided to admit me.
I love you, sweetheart.
I love you, babies. Just got admitted, and we're having a baby tonight.
Yes, we are. So crazy.
I'm so nervous.
Just gonna try and get you during a contraction.
Didn't think it was gonna happen today.
Well, I know. They always surprise you, don't they? Didn't think we were gonna have one. Didn't think it was gonna happen today. Here, you should sip some of this.
I just thought for sure it was like false labor this morning.
I thought for sure it was a false pregnancy.
Oh, you're just stressed out because you're not in school anymore. Like, that's something to stress out about. Taking a vacation.
I love you, Mama.
I love you, Daddy. I feel myself bleeding.
A lot or a little? Like you feel like you're wet in the bed?
I mean, like the drops, you know? Not like my water's breaking.
Okay. Well, it's a strong one.
No, it kind of stopped. If it's strong, I don't really feel it too much.
It spiked at.
It's like coming on right now.
It spiked at 5, went back down to 2.
I'll probably call Chevlet again and tell him that I'm thinning and stuff.
God, Sheblet's a good doctor, man.
Yeah, I was like trying to tell your mom a story about something that happened yesterday, and I could not even remember. I was like, I don't even know what I'm saying. I'm sorry. I feel like I just can't think look straight.
Yeah.
I like that whooshing sound.
Yeah, you've been having perfect contractions.
Just like consistently.
Mm-hmm. This one's tapering off right now.
Man, some of these ones now feel like as bad as they did when it was all the way at a 10. I'm so nervous.
You're okay. Why are you nervous, baby? You're already here.
But now it's confirmed that we're having a baby today.
Yeah, that's okay. We've been looking forward to this day, right?
Well, I was looking forward to August 13th.
But you and I never get what we want, sweetheart.
I know, god dang it.
I know.
Why did my dad have to... God, why does he have to be such a jerk?
I know.
I know, he's just proud and excited. It's just like... It literally has to be like, I told you it was going to be in July. He's like, always like, oh, I told you so. I told you so.
I know.
Like, that's the last thing I want to hear, being in freaking labor.
Right. Could you imagine being in the African bush doing this?
No.
Crazy, right? Oh, that's huge, dude. You've got it, baby.
And send me into my own labor and delivery room, which took probably another hour, hour and a half. I probably didn't get into my labor and delivery room until about 7 or 8 p.m. And basically once we got to that point, it was Randy, his mom, and I who were hanging out in the delivery room. His grandpa ended up showing up a little bit later, but I was so discombobulated at the time that I really don't know when he showed up. I basically just kind of lost track of time once we got into the labor and delivery room. My contractions were getting really bad. I was having some that were off the charts. The nurse came in and her name was Lorelei. She was amazing. She was definitely one of the best nurses I could have ever asked for to help me deliver my baby. But we got into the, we were in the labor and delivery room, pregnancy brain still. So I had been there, it was probably a few hours. We were watching some movies. They were asking me about my pain level and I told them I think I'm at about a 5. I don't really know how to judge my pain because I do have a high pain tolerance. And she said if I was at a 5 that I really wasn't in severe pain. So I asked if I could get just a painkiller through my IV, which the nurse agreed with and she was going to go get it for me. So we were waiting for that and probably about an hour to an hour and a half went by and the contractions just kept getting worse. And when I say they were getting worse, they were getting really, really bad to the point where I was tearing up, but it still wasn't nearly as horrible as I was expecting, especially from all of the horror stories that I've heard. But when it got to the point where the contractions were getting even closer together and I was just in a lot of pain, I decided to call the nurse and see where my pain medicine was because I was just kind of trying to judge how much longer until I could feel a little bit better. And when the nurse came in, they kind of saw that I was in a lot more pain than I had been in, and I was dilated, I believe, to a 6 or a 6.5. So at that point, we decided instead of going with the intravenous pain medication that I would just go ahead and get my epidural because that was something that I was open to throughout my entire pregnancy. I was very nervous about it. And Randy gets really queasy around blood and needles and stuff like that. So his mom decided to stay in there with me for moral support. And so they basically had me get up on the side of my bed and curl my back into almost a C shape. And during that time, I started crying. I almost broke down because I was so nervous. I didn't want to get the epidural, but the anesthesiologist came in and he was a really nice guy, and he basically just kind of walked me through the whole process. They gave me a local anesthetic on my back, which really helped the epidural pain because I really didn't even feel it when they put in the epidural catheter, I guess they call it. So I did kind of jump, and I'm assuming that's when he was actually putting in the catheter for the epidural. And after that, they did actually give me a catheter for my urine, which I did not know was going to happen, but at the same time, I didn't even feel it, so it was all good. I don't really have much footage of the actual labor and delivery process because it was just a really hectic and emotional time for me and my family. Randy, like I said, gets kind of queasy in situations like that, so he didn't really want to be up too much and cause himself to pass out or anything like that, which I completely understand and I'm completely fine with. And so anyways, we just kind of sat there. Randy's grandpa was there at this time, Randy's mom and Randy, and I was just hanging out in my hospital bed. After they gave me the epidural though, oh my gosh, my skin got so itchy. I've never felt so itchy in my life. The drug that they gave me during the epidural was fentanyl, which is an opiate. It's a very strong painkiller, and I personally don't deal well with drugs, painkillers and stuff like that. So my God, I just started itching so bad, and the nurse Lorelai was really concerned about me scratching myself, so she handed me some hospital rags and let me rub them all over my body to help itch them, to help scratch the itches. And I noticed that my right side was a lot more numb than my left side because my leg itched so bad, yet I could not get the feeling to go away no matter how much I scratched it because it was so numb. But after that, I honestly didn't really feel the contractions. They were looking at the chart and they said I was having off the chart contractions. I didn't even feel them at this point. So if you are concerned about getting an epidural and whether or not it's gonna help you, I would say at least consider it because it is a terrifying experience, but at the same time, it is so much more worth it than being in constant pain and agony for hours upon hours. After a little while, probably about 45 minutes after receiving the epidural, I did end up getting extremely nauseous, and it lasted for about 5 to 10 minutes. The nausea kind of went away, and then I did end up getting nauseous again, and at that point I knew I was gonna be sick and I knew I was gonna throw up. So I was looking all over the place for anything to throw up in, and Randy's mom was trying to help me, but she couldn't find one of the hospital bags. So I ended up grabbing the cup of ice that I was eating and I ended up throwing up into there. Thankfully it wasn't a lot, so I did catch it all in the cup. Nasty, probably TMI, but whatever, part of the process I wanted to share. And so at that point, I kind of just was trying to relax. I laid on my side and I laid there until about 12:45 in the morning. And that is when I started feeling this extremely weird sensation in my pelvis. It felt like what a water balloon would feel like when it is blowing up, and then all of a sudden I just felt a huge burst and gush of water everywhere. And I just kind of internally panicked at that moment because Randy's grandpa was in the room and I didn't know how much information I should share, but I looked at all of them and I just told them, I think that my water just broke. I don't know what to do. So we called the nurse, she came in, checked that my water broke, checked my dilation again, and I don't know how far I was dilated at this point, but I think it was somewhere around a 9. She even said that she could see the baby's head and hair. So at that point, I started getting nervous because if she could see that much of the baby, that meant obviously he was almost out. So she decided to go and call my doctor and give him a warning to let him know that he should probably start making his way to the hospital. And that was about 1 o'clock in the morning. And at this point, they started having me get ready to start pushing. The nurse, she was actually helping stretch out my parietal area. I think that's what it's called, or parietal, I think might be a nerve. in your head, I'm not sure, perennial. She was helping stretch that area so I wouldn't tear during the actual delivery process. And that part, it kind of hurt, but like I said, I had the epidural, so I really wasn't feeling too much of the pain. But during that point, she was actually having me push through the contractions, and at the beginning, it really wasn't too hard. It is very hard to hold your breath and push, especially while you're laying on your back. But this process probably took about 20 minutes until my doctor showed up, and he came and checked me out and saw that everything was going good. So he decided that he was gonna go wait out at the nurse's station and chit chat until I actually got far enough into labor for the delivery process. So about 57-ish minutes later, we were finally to the point where baby Zephyr was making his way out into the world. So my doctor came in and we really started giving those pushes a severe, strong effort. And at that point, I was so exhausted. I had been up for about 18 hours, completely in labor the entire time. And basically, I kept pushing. I got to the point where basically I just wanted to give up. I was so exhausted. I was so tired from pushing because they make you do it in sets of three sets of 10 seconds apiece, one right after the other. And then they give you a little bit of a break until your next contraction comes on, which is about 3 minutes later. So as I was pushing and working on getting Zephyr out of my birth canal, the doctor noticed that I had a mole on my lower left butt cheek, which we had noticed. I noticed it my whole life, but during my pregnancy, it started to change shape and density. So he was looking at it, asked if I could feel it, which I could. So they were giving me some more anesthetic in my buttocks, my butt, so I wouldn't feel it. He asked if I wanted him to cut it off, which I did, and he ended up sending it in for some lab tests to see if it was cancerous, which I haven't heard back on that, so I don't think it was. But that was basically about 15 minutes before I actually delivered Zephyr. So they ended up gluing that up. They used super glue because it was squirting everywhere every time I pushed. And so Zephyr basically got to the point where his head was almost out of my birth canal. You could see the hair, you could see everything. And the nurse asked me if I wanted to touch it. And at that point, what went through my head was like, oh my God, this is really gross. This is really weird. But at the same time, I don't want to miss out on this experience to feel my baby before he actually comes out of me. So I went ahead and I touched his head before he came out, and it was by far one of the weirdest feelings I have felt in my life. And at that point, I just pushed a few more times and Zephyr came magically. And at that point, I was kind of worried because when Zephyr did come out, when his head came out, he did not cry like you see in the movies, how babies come out and they're instantly screaming and crying and all of this. Well, he didn't start crying, so they suctioned him out. He was breathing, everything was okay. He kind of did a few whimpers and moans. They put him up on my chest for a few minutes while I delivered the placenta. And once the placenta was delivered, they went ahead and took Zephyr from me. They cleaned him up, they weighed him, measured him, all of that good stuff, which his measurements were, he was 20 inches long, his head was 33 inches around, his chest and shoulder area was 31 inches, and his weight was 6 pounds, 8.5 ounces. Like I said, I did deliver him about 2 weeks early. I delivered him at 37 weeks and 6 days, but it was actually 38 weeks by the day that I delivered him. 37 and 7 days, we'll say. Because I delivered him Friday morning at 2:33 in the morning. Which was definitely one of the most amazing experiences of my life. At that point, when they put him on my chest, I just started crying because I was so happy, not only that the process was over, but also because my baby was happy and healthy and I was holding him in my arms. And I don't know, it was just an amazing experience. After that, basically, Randy and I, we kind of hung out. We did some bonding time with the baby. We both got to do a little bit of skin to skin. I got to breastfeed him, which was a lot easier than I expected. He took very well to breastfeeding, which was a blessing. And after that, they basically left us in the labor and delivery room for a while. Probably about 10 a.m. or so, I got moved into my own recovery room, which was upstairs. And at that point, I was so sleep deprived because I had been awake for 26 hours. with no sleep. I was trying to accustom myself to having a newborn, and Randy was just completely exhausted. I was exhausted. So Randy ended up actually calling his mom, and they switched out places for a little while. He decided to go home and sleep and shower up and take some Advil and stuff like that since we forgot to bring some to the hospital. And his mom came back to the hospital to help me out with the baby. And I still didn't get any sleep. By the time Randy came back later that afternoon, we had been talking with my family the night before, trying to figure out if my grandma and my dad would be able to make it up for delivery, which they weren't, and I didn't even think that they were actually gonna make it up to the hospital while I was there. But I got a text a few hours into the day, probably about, I don't know, maybe it was 8 o'clock in the morning or so, maybe it was 10, I'm not really sure. Like I said, I was so sleep deprived, but we found out that my family was driving up there. At least my dad and my uncle were coming. And at this point, I did break down. I started crying. The nurse came in and she was kind of concerned because she couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, and I let her know, I'm just so tired, you know, my family, I didn't think they were gonna be coming up, and now all of a sudden they're deciding to come in. I don't know if I'm ready for that. I don't know if I'm mentally prepared. So she let me know that they would go ahead and put a note up at the nurse's station that if anybody came to visit for me, to make sure to give my room a call before they actually let anybody in, which I was extremely grateful for. So by the time my family got there, I did end up calming down, and I'm so thankful and grateful that they were able to come and see Zephyr on the first day that he was alive, because that is such an amazing experience, and you know, it's something that you can never get back. So I'm so glad that they were able to make it. I have to thank my Aunt Judy and Uncle Mark so much for working that out for me, because I don't know what I would do without them or without you guys. And basically I stayed in the hospital for another whole day while they continued testing Zephyr and I to make sure we were both healthy. My hemoglobin was kind of low, so they were a little bit concerned that I may have had some sort of infection, but it ended up fixing itself over a few hours. And the next morning they decided to release me and let me go home, which to me, I was terrified. I did not want to go home with my baby. I was terrified that I wouldn't be able to take care of him. I wouldn't have anybody who can answer my questions right there, or somebody who can come in with medical attention. But we ended up going home that day, and it's been a little bit over 3 weeks now, and Zephyr and I have transitioned pretty wonderfully. I am pretty sleep deprived, and I have been for the past 3 weeks. I'm feeling a little bit better today, but the past few days I was just a mess because Zephyr has been dealing with colic and extremely bad gas, so that has been something we've been struggling through. But we've got an appointment next week for his month checkup, which is just insane to me. So I guess at this point, I don't have anything else to share, but it was a pretty awesome experience. Labor and delivery was definitely not as bad as I imagined. I seem to have a fairly easy labor and delivery process. Everything went smoothly for me and for the baby. It was kind of a long process, but at the same time, everything went great, so there's nothing that I can complain about. But now that I'm done with sharing the entire process with you guys, I will show you my little baby. And he's sleeping right now, so I really don't want to wake him up. I would pick him up and show him to you guys, but he's sleeping right over here in his cradle, so I'm going to actually just take the camera over there and show you guys really quick. Here's tiny baby Zephyr. Sometimes he has a hard time sleeping, so since he's sleeping so soundly, I definitely don't want to wake him up, but he is just gorgeous. So that is my labor and delivery video. Thank you guys so much for checking this video out. If you're not a part of my channel already and you want to see some more updates about us, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below, and also leave a comment if you have any questions about labor and delivery. I would love to help answer them for any pregnant women or people who plan on becoming pregnant. Also, again, thank you so much for checking out this video. I hope to see you guys soon. If I do, then I'll see you soon. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm delirious right now, but yeah, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys next time.